Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Just Us Dialogues webinar series, Yearning to Breathe Free, Bringing Back Humanity to Immigration. Racial inequality, among other social justice issues, is at the forefront of America right now. Johns Hopkins University in Medicine, in partnership with Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and Johns Hopkins Urban Health Institute, is hosting the Just Us Dialogues, a social justice webinar that offers a platform for cohesive conversations around justice. Various social justice and civil rights experts will discuss a variety of topics, including the Fourth Amendment and proposed reforms, which occurred on August 20th, protecting youth of color, which occurred on August 27th, and why immigration matters, which happens tonight, September 10th, along with decriminalizing mental illness, which will occur on September 24th. At the conclusion of the webinar series, Johns Hopkins will host their Road to Equity, addressing health equity and Achieving Restorative Justice Symposium on Thursday, October 8th. The symposium will be aimed at improving social justice and the health of American communities, especially the nation's most marginalized residents. Hello, my name is Tony Bridges. I'm a member of the Maryland House of Delegates and Assistant Director at Johns Hopkins Community and Engagement Service Learning Center, which is also called SOURCE. I'll be your moderator for tonight's webinar. This is the second discussion of the series and will feature Erika N, who's the founder and managing partner of the law offices of Erika N, Dr. Kathleen Page, who's the founding co-director of Centro SOL, Center for Salud, Health and Opportunities for Latinos at Johns Hopkins, and Claudia Cubas, Litigation Director at CAIR Coalition. Let me tell you a little bit more about our panelists. Dr. Kathleen Page is an associate professor in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Her work focuses on promoting health equity for migrant populations. She is the founding co-director of Centro SOL, Center for Salud, Health Opportunities for Latinos, which through programmatic interventions, research, and advocacy, addresses the impact of immigration policy on health. She also directs the Access Partnership, which provides access to effective, compassionate, evidence-based primary and specialty care for uninsured and underinsured residents at Johns Hopkins. Thanks for joining us. We also have Claudia Cubas. Claudia joined CAIR Coalition in 2011 and currently serves as Litigation Director. She manages and coordinates litigation across all three programs at the organization, involving issues related to access to justice, detention, and eligibility for relief for children and adults who are detained by ICE within the jurisdiction of the Fourth Circuit. She believes that representation is the key to helping detained immigrants avail themselves of the rights in detention and succeed in gaining relief from removal. She spearheaded the organization's development of pilot representation projects in Maryland. In the midst of the pandemic, she represented detained children and adults in filing habeas petitions seeking to be released from congregate institutional settings so that they can safely reunite and socially distance with their families. We also have Erika N. Erika is the founder and managing partner of the law offices of Erika N. PC, one of Dallas's most highly sought and regarded immigration and criminal law firms. Erika is revered as one of the most knowledgeable and reliable immigration attorneys in Texas. With a success rate of more than 90% positive resolutions, her Dallas and Fort Worth firms are honored to provide exceptional service in the most complicated areas of criminal, immigration, and naturalization law. She is especially renowned in the area of obtaining lawful status, deportation, citizenship, political asylum, green card applications, and general immigration issues. Thank you all for being part of the panel today, and we look forward to a really robust discussion. Before I begin, let me just remind the audience that you can type your questions into the Zoom chat or Facebook comments, or you can also text your questions to 22333 and type JHUWL in the message. Again, you can type your questions in the Zoom chat or Facebook comments, or text your questions to 22333 and type JHUWL in the message. So with that, let's begin. Actually, let's begin with the history of this issue. And so I will throw this first question out to Kathleen. So from Ellis Island to modern day, how have immigrants been perceived and received in this country in the last 150 years?
So, hi, everyone, and thank you for having me, and thanks for that question. So very broadly, of course, the United States is considered the country of immigrants. However, unfortunately, dating back to our founding, there has always been exclusionary policies, and in particular that have been racialized. And to start with that, the 1790 Naturalization Act, at that time, of course, this country had Native Americans and then people who were coming to live here. And so there was there was a welcoming of immigrants to build a country. However, and you only had to be here for 2 years to be eligible for naturalization. However, you had to be white and free. So even back then, there was already racialization of who could be a US citizen. Later in the 1800s, the first law that really was exclusionary to a certain ethnic group or race was the Chinese Exclusion Act in the late 1800s, which specifically excluded Chinese people from becoming citizens in the United States. And there were also other exclusions based on things like infectious diseases, the type of work you did, income, literacy, etc. In the 1920s was when we had quotas in this country. And the interesting thing about that, again, it goes back to selecting certain groups of immigrants as preferable or not. The quotas were based on the census data from 1890. And interestingly, the rationale for the quotas at the time was that they were the people here, Congress was worried that there were too many Southern Europeans. So Southern Europeans, I guess, were not as preferable as Northern Europeans. And the thought was that by having these quotas that represented what the country looked like in 1890, there would be limits in how many, because at the time there weren't that many Southern Europeans. It also totally excluded Asians from immigration and citizenship. And then there was the act later on, which was really what we call now family ties. And the intention of that was really not to diversify this country. However, it actually did, because by providing a pathway to citizenship to people who already had family in this country, the demographics has changed enough in this country that this actually did provide an avenue for people from other countries to become citizens here, regardless of their race. But I think it's really important in this conversation to remember that even from the founding of this country, race has always been a huge issue. And I think it plays out in what we're seeing today as well.
Thank you for that, Kathleen. I think you're absolutely correct, especially talking about the current times and the things that we're going through now. It's really interesting to talk about how things are today as opposed to how things were in the past. And so I guess this next question is for Erika. Looking at our current administration's handling of immigrants, especially immigrants of color, how does our current administration's handling match up to past presidents and administrations?
Well, Tony, I would say our current administration handles things totally different. For example, our current administration considers countries like El Salvador, Haiti, and Africa as shithole countries. In the next sentence, our current administration will say, we should bring in more immigrants from Norway. Clearly goes back to what Kathleen is saying. It is about race. But if we look a little further, our current administration has also seen the need to take away TPS from Haiti and El Salvador. Also, separating children from their parents, leaving them without any hope. However, if we look at past administrations, the Obama administration gave us DACA and DAPA. We know what happened with both of those. Also, we can go back to the Bush administration after 9/11. We have what is now the Department of Homeland Security and ICE. All of these things are to help streamline the immigration system. Even when we think about the Clinton administration to protect the borders, Operation Gatekeeper. And we can go all the way back to 1965 to President Lyndon B. Johnson where he thought the civil rights of these individuals needed to be protected, and he enacted the Immigration and Nationality Act. So I would say that our administration has done a poor job compared to the other administrations, and it's going to take some work to bring about some change, Tony.
Thank you for that. You made some really good points. So this current administration has used immigration, specifically from Mexico and other countries from the region, as a tool to divide the nation and has kept its word to its base. What are the strategies to make changes within this construct? And I'll open this up to any of our panelists.
Well, Tony, I would say that we need better leadership and better governance. And I think that we all need to recognize the contributions that Latinos especially have made to this country. And we need to first look at the people from Mexico and what they've given to the American economy and how we need to make them a part of the American dream.
Yeah, Tony, I agree with Erika, and I would also add to that, that we as a nation, as Americans, I know dreamers, I'm friends with dreamers, I'm friends with immigrants, I'm friends with asylum seekers and refugees. I represent them, but they're part of my community. And it's not enough to vote in a new administration. I do think that is needed in terms of addressing the governance issue that Erika mentioned. But we also need to hold our legislators and congressmen and women and potentially our new president accountable that they can't just change policies or regulations, because those things can be quickly pulled right underneath us, just like what's going on with DACA. We need more permanent solutions, and that means coming together and changing our immigration laws so that some of these things that are going on don't ever happen again. Right now, the ban on nationality, there's a section in the Immigration Nationality Act that's now being used to ban all sorts of people, not just Muslims. Right now, we're seeing family separation and family detention. Why? Because there's nothing in our laws that says that can't happen. Right now, we're seeing asylum seekers being stranded in Mexico because there's an ambiguity in the way that Congress wrote our laws. And so those things need to be fixed.
Yep, thank you for that. Claudia, just staying with you for a second, what do you think is the most significant policy change to overcome or address at this point?
Yeah, so Tony, I would say that there are two, and it actually goes to Kathleen's point earlier. The way that we saw a real change in our country about diversifying, the beauty of diversity in our country was through immigration through families, but also through asylum. Those have been the bastions and the most significant ways that people have come to the United States and gotten more permanent status in the United States. And exactly, those are the targets that this administration has been focusing on to stop. How are they stopping family immigration? Through the public charge. How are they stopping asylum? Through all the bans on asylum and all the new policies where you can't even now apply for asylum based on your gender. You have to prove that that's a protected ground, things like that. So I would say policies that have gone to asylum and family immigration, especially the public charge, have been changed. I mean, they have been dramatic in terms of turning things on their heads.
So I make no bones about it. I'm looking for a change in administrations after the November election. But the question is, what will immigration reform look like after the current administration's departure?
I'll start.
For anyone.
Okay. I believe that immigration reform will look a lot different. I believe that it will start with reinstating DACA, what the Supreme Court intended in June. However, I think that we have a long road to go because the current administration has enacted over 400 executive action policies affecting immigration, and they actually hurt immigrants. So we have to go back, the new administration will have to go back and clean up all of those things and then be able to create a path for people for legalization. So it won't be a quick fix.
Right.
Yeah, I second what Erika is saying. It's a two-parter. The administration needs to come in and clean all these bad policies, but then again, we need something more permanent. And that's where congressmen and women and our potentially future president needs to roll up their sleeves and come to an agreement and make some changes to our immigration laws.
So in the world of COVID these days, there's a lot that we could probably talk about in terms of how these policies impact the public health, I believe. So let me ask just to Kathleen, how do you think these policies impact public health?
So these policies impacted public health even before COVID. And I tell you that COVID has unmasked a grotesque disparity that is directly linked to these policies. And it is really heartbreaking. I'll give you an example from last year and then I'll illustrate how things evolved this year. So last year, because of the public charge rule, my colleagues in pediatrics started to see families disenroll their US-born kids from food stamps and benefits because the parents were undocumented and they were worried that just having their kids have those needed assistance for food would be a problem. So that already was a really bad signal. I had several, I do infectious diseases. So some of my patients have HIV. Patients who had been controlled and had been totally doing well were refusing to come to the clinic because they were worried that if they took their medications, et cetera, there's Ryan White aid. It doesn't impact public charge, but they were worried about it. And at the same time, the Trump administration is saying that they want to eradicate HIV, which is laughable when at the same time you're creating policies that make some people not even want to take their medications because they're afraid. So when COVID started, I actually wrote a perspective worried about this. And I said, we have this public charge rule. People are being told to seek care. And we have been seeing that people are worried about this. And if you went to the public charge website, it said, don't worry, you can seek COVID care. Well, I tell you that when I sat down and wrote that piece, which was in March, I had no idea how bad this would be. And by April, I was getting calls from the ICU at Hopkins, unprecedented numbers of undocumented immigrants in our system. The positivity rate among immigrants in our system, undocumented immigrants, was over 40%. And there were disparities in all groups, but as point of comparison, it was 40% among Latino immigrants. It was about 20% among Blacks, non-Hispanic Blacks, and it was about 8% among whites. So there was a huge disparity. And when I met these patients, over and over, I heard the same story. They had to go to work because again, and these are policies from prior years, but they are ineligible for unemployment benefits, so they had to go to work. They weren't getting the stimulus check, so they had to go to work. They had families to support. Because of the way, the unjust way that the system is set up, because I think there's a huge hypocrisy. On the one hand, the administration says we don't want immigrants, but our economy runs on immigrants and they're low wage earners. So many of these immigrants were living in super crowded housing. When I say crowded, it's 5 families in a 5-bedroom apartment. So 1 family per bedroom. And of course, COVID was passing. And heartbreakingly, I heard so many people say who came to the hospital really late and said, I didn't want to come. Like someone had to force me. I couldn't breathe, but I didn't want to come because I was worried that ICE would be there, that I would be, that this would have consequences. When we offered people the isolation hotel, nobody wanted to go because isolation hotel sounded like family separation to them. So I've gone on a long time, but it is profound. It's still profound. We are still dealing with the consequences of how immigration policy directly affected and impacted the cases of COVID-19 in this community.
Kathleen, let me ask you, how do you get around that then, right? And so for the individuals that are saying, all right, I'm worried that if I go, I'll be separated from my family or ICE may be involved. Like how do you overcome that with those individuals to make them comfortable enough to actually want to go and seek that care?
It's really difficult, and I think the way that we did it, and I don't think we were 100% successful. You have to engage community leaders, community partners, people who are trusted. Here in Baltimore, we worked really closely with Esperanza Center. They have a clinic and a legal office. We worked with Father Bruce, who's a very respected leader. Pastor Nunez, some religious leaders can really be influential. We worked with Somos Baltimore Latino, different venues. But I will tell you, and I suspect this is the same in other minority communities, that so many times I have heard people also say, I am not going to the hospital because we know that this country is against immigrants. This whole COVID thing is something to eliminate us. When we go to the hospital, we hear that they kill us, they inject us, etc. Now, I know that's not true. And thankfully, we've had some patients who have gone through this and have related their experience. But I also understand that when a community has been under such duress, they've been called, I mean, explicitly rapists, you need to leave, criminals, etc. It is not unimaginable. It's easy to imagine how when people read Latinos and African Americans are most affected by COVID-19, they make two and two. You know, they don't like us and this is happening, and therefore it is dangerous to go seek care. So the mistrust is horrific, and it's of course terrible for public health.
Yep. Thank you for that. Erika, we've talked about how immigration has impacted public health. Can you talk a little about what you've observed in the detention context?
Well, the detention center conditions are simply deplorable. And what I mean is the way that they're treated, fed, housed, and the emotional turmoil that everyone goes through while they're detained. However, our current administration says that the detention center living is 10 times better than where individuals come from. But how can one say that when a person is restricted in their freedom, when they're separated from their families and treated in a humane way? So right now, we're not hearing a lot about detention centers, but we need to believe and know that this same treatment is still going on. And the reason I believe that we're not hearing a lot about these detention centers is because we're so close to the upcoming presidential election.
But so we may not be hearing about what's happening in those detention centers, but you are, right?
Absolutely. We hear stories.
Absolutely.
So what, give us an idea of some of those stories that you're hearing about those detention centers.
People have heart attacks and are begging to go to the hospital is the first one that comes to my mind. People are measles outbreaks, COVID outbreaks. They have measles, and if it's their day in court, they still have to show up.
Wow. All right.
They're issued Tylenol.
I mean, I just want to say that it's really, you know, there are two sets of professionals right now that are being affected in the line of their work. They are responding, and they're also experiencing vicarious trauma. And the first is our first responders battling the COVID, this pandemic crisis, this public health crisis, region to region. But you know what's been going on a bit longer is immigration attorneys and immigration advocates and responders in the jails, because the rate of suicide, of PTSD, of concerns, and this all comes from calls such as, I mean, just about a month ago, I had a client call me and say, Miss Claudia, can you help me connect to three-way with my wife right now? I just saw a man collapse. we're cohorted because we're all have COVID-19, and I think I'm gonna die.
Wow.
And how do you respond to that? I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a mental health professional. It affects me too. And, you know, I just want to reiterate for our audience, there is most of the detention centers that Erika was talking about are along the southern border, but we have jails everywhere. And in fact, the largest COVID outbreak nationwide for immigrants that are detained is right around this area. It's in Virginia. It's actually a jail that my organization that I work for serves. And it has been horrific. It has been horrific to receive 5, 7, 10 calls a day of people telling you the same thing. They're not giving me my medicines and I'm afraid to die.
Wow.
But also, Tony, I would like to add that the emotional turmoil that these detainees go through, sometimes they break down. Just a couple weeks, I had a client, he just broke down. The individuals from the jail called me as his attorney and said, "We don't know what to do with him. Can you help him over the phone?"
Wow.
So this is what we're dealing with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to add to Erika, you know, what people are experiencing right now, and for some reason my video is off. So what people are experiencing in detention right now, you know, it's almost like if they didn't deny my case because I actually lost my case, they're denying me because I'm gonna die here or through attrition. You know, they're denying my case by making it so insufferable, so difficult for me to hang on for dear life that I will want to go back. I will be pleading for deport. And that's not okay. I mean, we're having to cheerlead our clients to say, hold on, fight your case.
And I would just add that honestly, this is a violation of human rights. I mean, this is it is dehumanizing. The only way that anyone can even think of is they have dehumanized these individuals completely. And also add that in the Obama administration, there are very well established ways of monitoring people in the community. You don't have to detain them. People show up to their hearings. You can leave them out in the community. You know, if they need to wear an ankle bracelet. I had many patients when in the Obama administration who wore them. They're not beautiful, but they let you be. And in this crisis of COVID-19, it's really, especially in this crisis, although as Erika mentioned, there were measles outbreaks before, there were flu deaths in kids that happened in detention. So things that really were preventable even before COVID. But during COVID, to detain people that truly are safe to be out and monitor in the community is really inconceivable. And I think a real violation of human rights.
Especially when you have policies and procedures in place that allow you to set a bond and release someone out into the population. The bond, of course, guarantees that they may show back up. Why do you detain them unnecessarily when you don't have the manpower or the space to house them, right, to treat them unfairly?
You know, and I think that's what I like about this webinar series. You know, a lot of the things that you all are talking about, some of these stories, some people probably never hear about, right? Like some people are probably not aware of everything that's going on, whether it's with the detention center or individuals that are, you know, trying to get help related to COVID. These are stories that I think people need to hear. And that's why I think this is an important dialogue to have, you know, whether it's through Zoom or webinar, or however we do it, so that individuals can know that there's a lot going on that they may not be aware of that, you know, needs to be taken into account about this administration, about what's going on in the world today. Let me just say, before we move on to the next couple of questions, again, for our audience that's listening, please type your questions into the Zoom chat or to the Facebook comments, or again, you can text your questions to 22333 and type JHUWL in the message, and we'll be sure to try and get to your questions and comments if you have any. So for the next question, let me ask this. What are the steps that need to be taken in the immediate to protect those who are here legally, and to honor the rights of those who are either in the process of obtaining citizenship or undocumented? And that's for anybody. You can answer that question. Again, what are the steps to be taken in the immediate to protect those who are here legally, and to honor the rights of those who are either in the process of obtaining citizenship or undocumented?
So, Tony, I would say, just going back to those two pillars, right? That I was saying that's where there's an impasse. That's where there's bars right now of immigrants. In terms of families and being able to actually get a green card through your spouse, the public charge needs to just be completely rescinded. That is something that on day one, any new president can rescind right away. And the other aspect of it is that the Remain in Mexico asylum policy has been probably the most, that and the CDC order preventing asylum seekers from even entering, basically expulsing them very quickly. That those policies need to be rescinded right away. And this, a new administration would have to work with stakeholders, nonprofits, private and other stakeholders, including obviously government, for an orderly ability to allow those refugees, because they're refugee camps in Mexico, those asylum seekers to be able to apply for asylum in the United States and do it so in an orderly way where they have a full and fair immigration court, not tent courts, but a full and immigration court hearing to apply for asylum.
I agree with Claudia. And I also think that immigrants, whether they came into the country legally or illegally, can help themselves by going to talk with an attorney, seeking as much information as they can, not being afraid, so that they know that they have rights. A lot of people are eligible for benefits and a way of legalizing, but they don't know because they're afraid to get out and explore, for fear of that it may be open up, maybe a deportation or something like that. I think that people need to get out and ask questions.
Yeah, I would just add to that it's having credible information is so critical. And there's a lot of non-credible information. And in fact, there's people who are trying to make money out of immigrants in this process. And so as an example, a year ago, we had set up a medical legal partnership with the University of Baltimore. And I can tell you that it was incredible to have my patients, many of them actually after a consultation did not really have a pathway, but at least they knew what their rights were. They knew what not to do, what not to pay, who not. And so it really was quite reassuring for them. And it was funny because they were all quite nervous before that consultation. And then they all came back out, maybe not with the answer they hoped for, but really much calmer and had a much more clear understanding of what the steps were. The other thing, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, for example, the public charge, in most cases, it impacts a small group of people. But people have made this broad assumption that it applies to everyone and every benefit, and that is not true. The other thing, to Claudia's comment about the CDC's recommendation and the moving people to Mexico, honestly, from a public health standpoint, this policy that is basically weaponizing COVID as a reason to keep people to prevent asylees from entering is totally bogus. Like, you look at the numbers in this country. COVID in this country did not come because of asylum seekers. The numbers of COVID cases that have been attributed to asylum seekers is negligible compared to the gross mismanagement of the public health crisis in this country. And the 4 million cases or whatever million cases we have in this country have nothing to do really with immigration, but it's an easy scapegoat and a very useful scapegoat for this administration to say, oh, we're protecting this country from COVID by preventing immigrants and asylees from getting here. There is absolutely no public health data that supports that this is what's happening.
Right, right.
And I just want to add to what Kathleen said, Tony, in terms of, because I also want to respond to the other side where like, well, why do we, if we allow asylum seekers right now when we're in the midst of a pandemic, that will saddle our services that we need for Americans and other people here. So we're a great country. We can do two things at the same time. What we need is leadership and competent leadership, and also a clear national plan. And in addition to address what's going on with, our house right now, but also we don't have to detain asylum seekers. Right now, what we have learned is that when people are in congregate settings, that means in jails or in facilities that are closed, or when they're in indoor closed spaces, that's where the virus spreads. So let's not house people in congregate settings. Let's not have indoor services of that nature. We can process asylum seekers. We've been doing it for years. Many administrations prior to this administration process hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers every year, where they would process them, give them a court hearing, and they would be able to go and reunify with their family members. And in this pandemic, go and safely socially isolate with their family members and go to their asylum places, asylum hearings, and apply for asylum in a safe manner.
And Claudia, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, there are strategies that can be used to safely let people enter into this country, and symptom screens and testing, if more testing were available, can be done, and isolation at home can be done. And in fact, those have been implemented successfully in many countries. In this country, though, as an example anecdote, while at the one hand they're letting everyone get cohort in like very congregate settings in the southern border, in March, when northern Italy was exploding with cases, I had a friend who was flying in from Milan who had a cough from Milan. She flew in to Texas. No one checked anything. The whole plane was coming from Milan I'm going to venture and say mostly wealthy passengers who were coming from their vacations, and they all went through. My friend who had a cough actually isolated herself and then had to struggle to get a test. She ended up not having COVID. But these are the hypocrisies, right? On the one hand, a plane from an area that really had a ton of COVID comes in from tour with people coming, no one checks anything. But then in the southern border, where really at that time there weren't even like any cases, they are using that as an excuse.
Right. Now, this is a really good conversation to have. We can go back and forth about this all day, especially with the fact that, we're talking about, as I'm listening to everybody talk, we're talking about what needs to happen under a new administration versus what can happen under this current administration. Lord forbid, for me, if this administration continues after November, we still have to think about how we can continue to have individuals continue to thrive under this administration, regardless of whether or not we have a new president or not, right? So those are some things that we need to talk about. But before we get to those questions, I do want to talk about that. We do have some questions that came in through Zoom. The first question is, why is immigration dependent on economic contribution? If anybody wants to answer that.
I have one word, and it would be jobs.
Yep. Succinct, to the point, right?
I mean, it also can be, it's, the idea of economic contribution may be used as a euphemism for who is better to be able to contribute. So well-off immigrants, and generally well-off immigrants are going to be more white immigrants or from Western countries that have the means, that had originally the means in order to be able to contribute, not only bring themselves here, but contribute. But that is a very one-dimensional view, because immigrants from other asylum seekers, immigrants from poorer nations, et cetera, they contribute just as much. They pay taxes.
Right.
Many businesses are immigrant owned. So I see it as a situation of just a euphemism for xenophobia and racism.
Yeah, and I would agree. Let me just say and be clear. Especially during the first months of the pandemic, where everyone was home, who were the essential workers who were out there? Who were the ones that were taking care of the kids while someone was able to work at home? Who was doing the landscaping and delivering the food? And to me, it is outrageous and sad when again, in our hospitals, we started seeing all of these undocumented immigrants show up and people who were well-meaning were like, where did they come from? And I said, if you have gone to a restaurant, if you have done anything in the city, do you not know who's behind the scenes here? But it is an invisible group, and people who are not paying attention truly feel like they don't exist. And because they're so invisible, and they're of course intentionally invisible, because there's, being visible has consequences. Because they're invisible, I think that's part of the reason this administration can get away with the conditions in the detention center. It is a group that many have not met, even though they truly do interact with them every single day, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
And somebody one of the audience members said, well, there's unemployment right now. Yes, we are going through a situation where we have a fiscal crisis in addition that is pandemic as a result of the pandemic. But it's the idea of like, it takes money to make money. Well, it's the same situation. What creates more jobs? More people working, more people. If there are more people who need housing, guess what? There's more building for apartments, and then there's more jobs for builders. If there are more people who need food, there are more food banks, and even food banks employ people, more grocers, more farming. It takes money to make money. So this idea that, there's an employment and there's a limited finite number of jobs that can only go to people, that's not true, because we've been growing employment for years.
Right.
Yep. And let's be honest with ourselves. A lot of the jobs that new immigrants take to the country are jobs that Americans who've been here their whole life, they just don't want to do them.
Yep. Really good point. Really good point. Let me just ask another question that came in through Zoom. This is a good question for me because as a member of SOURCE, which is the Community Engagement and Service Learning Center for Hopkins, we're always asking about volunteer opportunities. And so one person asked, are there any volunteer opportunities available for those of us who want to help but are without immigration law, immigration policy degrees, or experience? How can they help?
This is a question after my own heart because I work for a nonprofit, but big picture, because I'm assuming there's audience members from all around, not just in this area, but all around the nation. Go to the nonprofits in your region, local nonprofits. The ACLU, I love the ACLU, but it's getting a lot of money. There's local nonprofits. Those are the first responders to the jails that are holding immigrants. Those are the first responders that are helping, immigrant families connect with, eviction, assistance, etc. So go to your local organizations providing services to immigrants. And that goes both for volunteering, but also for donating. If you can't donate money, understandable, we're in a fiscal situation right now, donate your time. The organization I work for, you don't have to know Spanish, but we staff a hotline, we do interpretations. If you do know another language, those things help. But support your local organizations, because really they're right now the backbone of helping these immigrants out in our communities. And if there is no change in the administration, they're going to be on the front lines helping your community members who are immigrants.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, as an example, Esperanza Center that I mentioned before, they set up a hotline that was truly a lifeline because it was the one place where people who didn't speak English could call and get connected with testing and get information. And that whole line, everything was volunteer based. The food distribution that was set through Hopkins and other institutions, volunteer based. Even the testing that we do, is volunteer based, like, because they, right now it's just hard to find people who can do this, etc. And so there are many opportunities for people to get involved, and please do so, especially because one of the things that worries me, and I don't know if Claudia and Erika, you have seen that the response to the disparities has also been mostly by minorities who are underpaid and low paid. And so I sort of cringe a little bit that there's an undue burden on low income minorities to respond as volunteers to the crisis. And I honestly, when I see that level of disparities, I think a volunteer response is completely inadequate. These should be really paid jobs, but unfortunately, that's not the case, at least not in this administration.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask another question. For those who are outside of this panel, I'm trying to figure out, for some individuals who want to get involved, who are the activists who are also leading this fight that are outside of this panel, that people may want to get in contact with, may want to get involved with? Are there other organizations that you might want to recommend, or people that you may have them want to look up to make sure that they are also following those individuals to get in the fight with those individuals as well?
Yeah, so Tony, I would say look at the lawsuits. If you just Google the lawsuits against immigration law, those are the organizations that are going to be on the front lines. But just again, keeping it regionally, locally, and also nationwide. So locally in this area, for instance, our organization has filed 2 lawsuits against asylum bans. We're the only provider of detention services in Maryland, Virginia, and DC. It's CAIR Coalition. I'm sorry, it's very flagrant, very direct, but look, we need help, both fiscally, but also volunteer-wise. But also there's other nonprofits in the region that are excellent, not just Esperanza, but Ayuda is part of a litigation right now against the fees for employment authorization that they basically got double, tripled. There is, for national organizations, I would look at National Immigration Law Center. It's called NILC. They've done a lot of work regarding the public charge rule. I would also look at, for nationwide, there's actually a small nonprofit called the, what's it called? It's AIC, I know it as AIC, alphabet soup, American Immigration Council. They actually are in charge of a lot of impact litigation. So they're fighting a lot, and they put out a lot of advisories for attorneys like Erika and myself to do a good job.
That's right.
And there's also, National Immigration Project, NIP, that's a nationwide organization. I could go on. I'm happy. What I can do is I can provide after the end, like the names of the Twitter handles of these organizations, but I would urge our audience, think locally first. If you have the ability to do that, go further nationwide, but think locally first. Your first responders are always local.
Right. And I would ask any of our panelists, if you have any organizations that you could think of, we'll be more than happy to share those with the audience, even after today's panel discussion. Another question that came in through Zoom is the Office of Refugee and Resettlement supporting immigrant youth during this COVID-19 pandemic with reunifying youth with their family members at this time? And that's
so that is their primary job. Their primary job is when a child is with them, is to find someone in the United States that they can reunify the child with. And as far as I know, they're still carrying out these duties. Claudia, do you have anything else?
Yeah, and just to kind of back up a little bit, Office of Refugee Resettlement is a government agency, and they're the ones who hold children. They have custody over the children. So what we have seen is reunification, but it actually occurred, faster reunification during the pandemic occurred after lawyers filed under the Flores settlement agreement to push for faster reunification. We saw initial slowdown during the pandemic. It's now back to more clear, concise processing of children to allow them to reunify. I mean, the organization I work for represents currently detained children. We've won a couple cases. We have a couple clients right now. The population of children in detention has gone down, but that's not because they're reunifying more children. It's because they're expelling. The government right now is expelling unaccompanied minors that are crossing the border through the CDC order. So unfortunately, I wish I could say, yes, everything's going fine, but it's actually a little bit bigger in terms of that because of that order.
Gotcha. So let me ask, Kathleen, let me ask you this question. How can people born in America be better allies?
Oh, I think, well, first of all of you who are born in America and listening to this webinar already are being allies, and just paying attention and reading about this is important. I think there's a lot of talk in general about privileges that many of us have in different settings. And, being a citizen is a huge privilege. In the eyes of those who are immigrants and who don't have all those benefits, it's a huge privilege. And I think we can take it for granted sometimes. And so being mindful, again, I think even like I said, paying attention to who is actually doing the work behind the scenes is important. I have also found it incredibly powerful, and I am so grateful in particular to African Americans who have joined in this fight. I think these issues of minorities are African Americans who are not immigrants. Of course, immigrants, there's also Latino immigrants, et cetera. But what I mean particularly, the African American community right now is, of course, under a ton of duress. There's so many things that need to be addressed in this country. But we, and Alicia knows this, for example, in some of the initiatives that we have done, some of our biggest allies have been African American leaders, and actually that's been incredibly useful because sometimes if only Latinos are advocating for themselves, it can be seen as bias, and it becomes a sort of a one group thing. And I would also hope to those Latino friends of us who are listening that they will also join the fight and for justice for African Americans and other minorities. But I really think that united people of color who can often relate, because although the aggressions may be a little bit different, there's an underlying theme that is actually common for all. And I think that issue of our humanity, our human rights, and a joint fight is really quite important and powerful. So I guess that's one way, but I think there's many ways. But just I do want to express my gratitude to those of you who are not Latino or not immigrant and who have joined this fight.
Yeah, thank you for that. Definitely appreciate it. I'm going to put myself out there for a second with this next question. I've got two questions. I know we only have about 5 minutes before we have to wrap up, but I've got one question that I would love to ask everyone. If you could just chime in for a second. What are the questions or requests that communities should be asking their elected officials, such as myself, to gain momentum for stronger immigration protections? So whether it's at the local, state, or at the federal level, what are those questions that communities should be asking their elected officials to have stronger immigration protections? And this is for anybody.
Well, I think and this is probably more of a question for Erika and Claudia, who are more the policy people, but I'll just say practically, from where I stand, local jurisdictions standing strong against ICE intervention and raids and sort of it has been critical. And I think that is something that can really be done at the local level. Being very clear about the police not cooperating with ICE, about ICE not being in hospital facilities, et cetera. I think that is critical, because especially that presence of ICE and raids and that uncertainty can really have a huge chilling effect on a community.
Yeah, I would just say it's a two-parter again, regional and national. Regionally, you should be asking, okay, we're a sanctuary, but not just a name only. Did we put money behind that? Are we funding representation programs? Because really the only way that immigrants are able to stay in the United States is if they qualify for a form of relief. So they need attorneys, or they need some type of legal assistance to be able to apply for those things. So representation programs that help immigrants, yes, you're thinking, well, why put money in that instead of this? Well, again, it's make money. To make money, you have to put money in, right? So a new green card holder is a new taxpayer, or potentially even higher earning wage earner taxpayer, and that helps our economy. And then nationally, I would say call your congressman and say, are you joining these letters holding the agency heads accountable for all the things that they are doing? Are you joining the letters? Yes, maybe right now we're at a standstill legislative wise in terms of new legislation, but are you at least supporting the current bills? Because it will be much easier to push something through if there's already current support of current bills right now. So I think those two ways would be important.
And I have two as well, Tony. I would ask someone in your position, when are the individuals who are doing their best, working and providing for their family, when will the police, stop harassing and threatening them because of the color of their skin? That's my first question. And number two, on a national level, when are people, or when is the government going to stand up and make ICE reunite children with their parents faster?
Right. I couldn't agree with you more.
Or release the families.
Yeah.
Release the families.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the other thing that I would say, that these are things that may seem trivial, but they're not actually. So at a national level, and a local level, who can get IDs? Because an ID, a driver's license, is critical. It is critical for so many things. Like you can't even get a lab in some places if you don't have an ID. And these restrictions are huge. If you don't have an ID, you can't drive, or if you drive, you're driving illegally, so you're likely to get stopped. And then, so IDs are critical. And there's actually been studies showing from California that providing ID laws are actually such a good public health intervention. Once again, people pay their taxes. It is safer for everyone to provide everyone IDs.
Or
yes, because then they can get insurance.
Why do you have to be placed in removal proceedings to get a driver's license, basically?
Right.
Because you then can apply for an EAD.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I feel safer, and I applaud Maryland legislators for passing, legislation to allow for undocumented immigrants to have driver's license. Why is that a good thing? Because then they can apply for insurance.
Yes.
And if you get in an accident with an undocumented immigrant, they don't flee and run because they're afraid you're gonna, somebody's gonna call ICE on them. Instead, they stay because they have insurance.
Right.
Right. And this is another critical example. If you have an ID, you can open a bank account, and you don't have to carry cash everywhere you go. And let me tell you that carrying $200 worth of cash at the end of a week is a very dangerous thing to do in many cities. It is not safe for anyone to do that. It also limits your saving capacity, everything. So these are just simple things that, of course, again, we don't think about them when we have access to them, but this is the type of thing that really limits immigrants' ability to move along and do things the right way, pay taxes, and also be safe.
Absolutely. I mean, it's even something that we passed legislation for returning citizens last year to talk about just the basic need for identification is that returning home to do things like get housing. And, it's you're preaching to the choir. And so I let me just end it right there. You all did an amazing job. I appreciate you so much for the insight, you know, the conversation, everything that you talked about today. I have so many more questions that I think a lot of people still have about where we go next and how we can make sure that we're doing the right things for the current administration and the next administration, hopefully as they come into play. But, you know, for now, unfortunately, I think we are going to have to end. But as we end, let me just take the personal privilege to once again thank you all for being on this panel discussion about this very important topic around immigration. You all have given us so much great insight as to what needs to be done next, now, and moving forward. And if you can offer any final advice for those participating in our webinar today, I'll allow you to just say those in the next 5 minutes, and then we will wrap up the discussion. But thank you once again from Johns Hopkins University and Health System and Urban Health Institute for being on our call today and giving your insight. But again, if there's any final advice that you'd like for those participating in our webinar today, this is your opportunity to give that final advice.
So Tony, I would like to say that the American immigration system can be a win-win for America and for immigrants. For America, because it can enhance the economy, and for the immigrant, because it can help them realize the American dream. Thank you. It was an honor being on the panel today.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tony, Erika, Kathleen, it's been an honor to sit with you, virtually sit with you and be part of this panel. My parting words to our audience is go vote. Like, former First Lady Michelle Obama, I wish I had her necklace. Go vote, because the courts are not going to save us.
Right.
So we need new leadership.
Thank you.
Yes, so I am also honestly so honored to be with this panel. It's been wonderful to share the time with you, and I've learned a lot from you guys. I think I'm gonna say repeat what Claudia said. Please vote locally, vote nationally. We really need every vote. And also pay attention, when things like the public charge and things come out, there are opportunities for the public to comment. And so these are really good opportunities to stay informed and also to put your voice out there.
All right. So once again, thank you all for your panel discussion and being on with us today. We definitely appreciate you. And to everyone that joined us for the Zoom today, thank you for joining us. Please stay tuned for the next in our series of the Just Us discussions, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you all.